We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, Wednesday edition, January 7th, 2026. Today, we're going to be talking about the DEI con game. You know, I found a piece over at Compact Magazine, a long-form piece. I think it's worth going into and delving into the various institutions that DEI has corrupted, and then comparing it through a prism also of a WWE Monday Night Raw experience that I had, and the simplicity that was that experience versus the complexity here. And the end game is a giant con game, and you're the mark. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, let's talk about some professional wrestling. My younger son is a wrestling fanatic. He watches Monday Night Raw all the time. He's going back through the archives. He doesn't care how long ago it was. He absolutely loves it. So for Christmas this year, decided to give him the present of bringing him over to a Monday Night Raw in Orlando. It was fun. It was awesome. It was an eye-opening experience. He had a blast. But I thought about it afterwards. And wrestling is really this blast from the past. I mean, the athletes are better. The acrobatics that they engage in now are far superior than anything that Hulk Hogan was doing. I don't care. He's the GOAT. I know the entire system doesn't exist without him picking up Andre the Giant. But really, if you look back at it, it was just kind of like bear hugging and leg drops. The guys today are doing backflips off of ladders and landing on each other. It was amazing. But still at its core, wrestling is a soap opera that pits heroes against heels. You know, looking around the arena, there was 10, 12, 15,000 people there. Grown men, without children, I might add, who just have been wrestling fans their entire lives, with authentic championship belts draped over their arms that were going for about $650. They were all about it. But it's heroes versus heels. And it struck me, wrestling's still very 80s and 90s in its view of the world. There were nothing but black guys wearing white guy gear and white guys wearing black guy gear. And everybody liked the hero and hated the villain. Very simple. It didn't matter about the color of your skin or the immutable characteristics you have or what you got dangling between your junk or who you like to have sex with. If you're a good guy, you're a good guy. We like you. And if you're a bad guy, we don't like you. Really simple. It's very 80s. It's very 90s. I remember being a kid and watching Steve Urkel. It never occurred to me that it was a black family. Or the Cosby Show. And look, I know Cosby had some things going on later on, but for what it's worth, as a kid, you watch the Cosby Show, it was just a family, right? Now, let's take that understanding of meritocracy and heroes and villains, and very simplistic in its worldview. And let's take it and compare it through a lens of a long-form piece that I found over at Compact Magazine, compactmag.com. And the piece is called The Lost Generation. It's by Jacob Savage. Throw it up there. Now, he goes into a discussion about how the DEI madness really started to rear its ugly head in 2014 and looks at the various institutions in which it has corrupted and poisoned. And I want to make sure that we spend an adequate amount of each of those. The first one that he talks about is media. Now, the piece begins actually with a discussion about the Trump administration. I think that's sort of a good comparison to make to the wrestling because you have a new champion, right? 2024 election came around. The American people sent a mandate. We didn't want Kamalamanism. We wanted Donald Trump. Make America great again. He was the new champion. He gets the championship belt. And the Trump administration started to peel back a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, was that enough? Was electing a new champion, was crowning a new guy, giving him that championship belt enough to fix the problem? No, it's not. So, the first piece of the institutions that have been corrupted that Jacob Savage talks about in this piece over at Compact Magazine, The Lost Generation, is the media. Now, he writes a lot through the eyes of various individuals that are in these industries, but we don't really need to get into that. Let's just talk about the institutions themselves. Media. In the aftermath of George Floyd's death, newsrooms tripped over themselves to stage a reckoning. The New York Times, at one point a newspaper, solemnly promised sweeping reforms. Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, declared it would become, quote, the most diverse and inclusive newsroom in the country. CNN, they were gone a long time ago, pledged sustained commitment to race coverage. By the early 2020s, Gen Z men had absorbed the message that journalism was not for them. The demographic shift reshaped not only who told the stories, but, and take note of this, guys, which stories got told. And that's really where it's all given away. Because it's not enough to say, oh, that's fake news or it's a biased media source. I'm not even going to take it under advisement. It's the what is covered and what's not. There's two ways you can lie. You can lie by commission, which means you're making something up, or you can lie by omission, which means you're leaving something out. And so much of the news story selection is in itself a manipulation. That omission of stories, it's not just crafting up the language and painting one side as good, one side as bad. That is your hero versus your heel, but it's the stories in general that don't get covered. And when you have newsrooms that are hell bent on meeting some sort of diversity quota because of the pigment in your skin or what you got dangling between your legs is more important, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to have a sacrifice of the quality of the news product, and you're also going to wind up hiring people that subscribe to the DEI con game, the communists that think that that is an objectively good thing. And those people then corrupt your newsroom and craft the narratives that we see on our news every single day, and also ignore some of the bigger stories. And they take these crazy perspectives on stuff. Now, let me give you an example. They mentioned there that the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, was going to pivot, and the New York Times was going to embrace a new outlook on DEI. So let's go over to the old gray lady, the New York Times, at one point a newspaper, for the latest and greatest example, because this Compact Magazine piece said it really started to pivot in 2014, 2015, reared its ugly head after the St. George Floyd riots that happened, the fentanyl overdose that was a murder on the hands of a police officer, according to our news sources. But how about something kind of more current? The New York Times, one point a newspaper, did publish this one out there. The headline: what happened to Mexico City's food scene? Americans. This is one of the funniest news pieces I've ever read. This journalist was actually deployed to Mexico City. I guess she wanted to go on vacation and got the newspaper to pay for it over the Christmas holidays. From the piece, U.S. citizens make up less than 7% of foreigners living in Mexico City, yet whole swaths of Mexico City's food scene have been remade in the American image. Oh, so awful. What is now Mexico endured 300 years of colonization by Spain, those evil white people from Spain, and came across and dealt with the Aztecs, who were just the native people who were ripping the hearts out of children because they believed that the tears appeased the gods. They were wholesome, But after the colonization from Spain, they lost significant territory to the United States. And now we got to bring in the president, who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler, according to these writers over at the New York Times. President Trump began his first run for office by referring to Mexican immigrants, i.e., illegal aliens, as murderers and rapists. And he recently called Mexico one of the, quote, worst places on earth. Fact check true. Many city residents feel as if they're going through another foreign occupation. Now, push pause there because what we're about to get into is one of the most hilarious lacks of self-awareness. Or maybe it's not because of the DEI, because we selected some of these journalists to go in there and ascend and write these pieces and push out these news stories that are then imbibed by a significant portion of the news consumers in our country. This is utter madness. So the piece again is called What Happened to Mexico City's Food Scene Americans, who were apparently a bad thing. Quote, "It's a form of colonization," said Oscar Rodriguez, who was standing in line at some sort of juice stand. He pointed out that the juice stand now offers almond milk, protein powder, and peanut butter. Quote, "Foreigners come in with these different types of food, and then Mexicans have a tendency to adopt them as well." And now the New York Times is portraying this as a bad thing when the exact opposite is supposed to be acceptable here, right? If you're an American and people from south of the border come across, you better damn well accept everything in their culture or you're a racist, right? Well, how about we just have a melting pot here? We can't, though, project that onto Mexico. They're supposed to be just Mexico only, but if you're America only, you're the problem, you're the racist. I've said for a while, there's a reason that salsa is the number one condiment because it's awesome and we like that. We don't, however, like the narco terrorism. So leave that if you come across the border here through legitimate means. But when the foot is on, if shoe is on the other foot, it ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. If you're in Mexico and the Americans come down, they don't want to have anything to do with what you want to see, even though you're bringing your sweet, sweet American cash. Back to the New York Times. This summer, hundreds of Mexicans marched through this city called Condesa, holding signs that read, quote, "Gringo, go home," blaming foreigners for higher rents and rapid gentrification in a country where the daily minimum wage is about $15. $15? I think our minimum wage in this country is like $7.25. So I guess they're killing it in Mexico right now. It's not surprising that American food has found its way to Mexico City over the past 2 decades as crime rates have fallen and fine dining restaurants have received international acclaim. The capital has become a tourist magnet. So let me get this straight. When crime rates fell and those cities became more appealing to go on vacation to or even move to, that's not good to bring in outside commerce that is enriching the area, gentrifying it as that's that ugly word that basically means that they took an old ghetto where the property values were next to nothing and people decided to prop up some businesses and then it made it more appealing and then property values went up, which you'd think economically is a good thing. This is the broken media. This is portraying the photo negative 180 degrees opposite story that we've been told since the election of Donald Trump Part 2, because he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler, where we're supposed to accept foreigners coming here and all that they have to offer, all the fentanyl and blight. And I don't know, if they're Haitian, they're eating dogs. All of those are just good to imbibe into our culture. And if we have a problem with it, in fact, if you go out and exercise your First Amendment right and hold up a sign that said, "Send them back, deport them all," then you're probably an anti-government extremist who knows to go to prison in the eyes of the New York Times. Now, that's an entire pillar. That's an institution that's been seized by DEI. But let's go back to Compaq Magazine and this piece called The Lost Generation, again written by Jacob Savage. And he goes to the next institution. We've already seeded media. What else could it be? Well, academia, of course. Didn't matter that as far back as 2012, women were more likely to be tenure track across the humanities than men, or that in 2015, peer reviewed studies suggested that STEM hiring favored women. What matters more are the optics, according to this piece, and that is that academia has too many old white guys. So, a couple of figures from more prominent institutions around the country. As much as we want to hate on the Ivy Leagues, they are still a known commodity. They're not just a degree, they're a pedigree. At Harvard's Art and Science tenure track positions pipeline for future faculty, white men have gone from about half of the tenure track positions 10 years ago to a quarter. White men who do not get hired are often, who do get hired, they're more often older and well established. So there's sort of this giant age gap that's now coming along. There's old white guys, and then everybody behind them is non white and non male. Berkeley, California, commissioned a regression analysis to identify which quasi legal strategies would produce the fewest number of white male job offers. And then since 2022, Brown has hired 45 tenure track professors, and 3 of them were white guys, which is about 6%. Now, how does that impact academia and how does that affect your life? I mean, that's just the ivory towers. Why do you care so much, Steve? Well, I mean, I think just about every single Supreme Court justice, maybe Amy Barrett, but I think the others are Ivy League graduates. So they're rendering decisions that are fairly impactful to my life and yours. What about scientific studies that go on? I mean, trust the experts. In the very early days of the coronavirus madness, there were all these studies that were getting put out. And when before they had lost all credibility, people were saying, hey, look, this is a study from Harvard. This is not some sort of podunk JUCO out in the Midwest. This is a ivory tower. We should probably take what they have to say because the science they're doing is probably pretty good. But due to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, the professors there probably not the best. So, real world examples I want to get to. Or actually, before we do that, let's show a little bit more of the ideological lack of diversity because the piece from Compact Magazine hammers down on how white guys are bad because they're pale or something. But what about the university's perspectives on a variety of ideas? Diversity of opinion. Well, perish the thought. So, over from Jonathan Turley, he actually highlighted how Yale University has almost no ideological diversity at it whatsoever. The headline is that study, Yale no longer has a single Republican professor across 27 departments. There's now not a single Republican found across 27 of 43 departments at Yale. Only 3% are Republicans across all departments. In comparison, 83% of the faculty vote for Democrats. I guess the other ones vote for the Democrat Socialist Party of America or the Green Party, something to that effect. I doubt they're really have a lot of libertarians at Yale. Other schools, 9%, so less than 1 in 10 of law school professors identify as conservative. And 3 out of 4 at Harvard faculty self-identified as liberal or very liberal, and only 5% identified as conservative. Now, how does this impact you? Because if you're not attending Yale or Harvard or law school, do you really care that much? Well, I mean, do you go outside? Do you drive a vehicle? Because you're going to be blamed for that. This is a study from Yale. Yale School of Public Health. The headline is Warning, U.S. climate linked to rising deaths from the heat. Well, the heat's happening clearly because you're putting out all that carbon, right? Because you drive an SUV. And this looks good, looks really sleek. This study has a nice picture of a thermometer and it's over 100 degrees. We're all going to die. And they're hoping that you just sort of accept the headline. It says severe cold remains a leading mortality risk, but heat-related deaths surged more than 50% in the last quarter century. But if you actually read into it a little bit further, you find out that almost nobody dies from heat at all. It went from 2,600 to 4,000 total in the United States. And in fact, I got a nice little graphic to show just what reality looks like. Here's what the experts over at Yale, which has no ideological diversity. they're just a bunch of communists who believe that population control is the solution, right? We have to get rid of the carbon, which is you, so that the temperature goes down by a fraction of a percent or something. And who cares about all that carbon being good for the trees and the trees then being good for the people? Almost a symbiotic relationship between us, set up by a providential figure. No, the expert said that the US climate is linked to rising deaths. But if you compare it to the crime related deaths over the last 100 years, you see that it's plummeted to almost nothing. And then, in fact, industrial advancements across the country that have been putting out all that mean, horrible, disgusting, dirty carbon have resulted in human flourishing. That's another institution that's been taken over by DEI. And as we're building towards this and we're identifying all these problems, you can feel yourself just getting angrier and angrier, right? You're saying, look, they call me a racist so long until I just finally throw my hands up in the air, right? Right? Let's poke you a little bit more. And back to this piece from Compact Magazine. Again, written by Jacob Savage. The headline is The Lost Generation. And guys, I'll put this in the notes here for the episode if you want to read it yourself. It is a very long piece, but it's definitely worth your time. If you want to read one thing today, recommend this one. Lost Generation, Jacob Savage. Let's go to Hollywood. Now, in the fall of 2014, the Oscars nominated only white people for acting awards. And then that's when the hashtag Oscars So White was born. And that bled into Me Too, and the mandates only intensified. And here's a quote from a former assistant out in Hollywood. It said, quote, "You could read a white guy's script, but there was no way in hell that person was going to get staffed on the show. Showrunners only had a couple of spots for white people, and they kept those for the 40 to 50-year-old white guys they'd known for years. So if you wanted to break into the industry, they weren't really interested in having you there." And that's kind of a brief rundown of how Hollywood, and again, that's been co-opted for years. Nobody's going to dispute that it's far, far left out in California. And the films that are being put out there always have this message, one or another, that the evil colonizers are out to get the natives who are just pure as the driven snow. I mean, look, the movie Avatar and the two sequels that are not worth anybody's time because they're just Fern Gully put out over and over and over again are pure propaganda. My kids, I told them they're not allowed to watch certain movies that put out this stupid propaganda. The Lorax movie, that's god-awful environmental terrorism as far as my perspective goes. Oh, capitalism is bad. It cuts down all the trees and we all die as a result. So those messages have been just going through Hollywood for years and years. How does DEI play into that? Well, as you'll take a script here or there, but when it comes to filming something or putting out content, I'm an adult. I can clearly see or watch something for the first 10 minutes and realize, oh, this is just going to be pure propaganda and I'm not really game for it, and turn it off. Or maybe if I just want to be mindless, I'll just say, look, I get it. I'm not going to have my opinions changed on these because these are just a bunch of idiots from Hollywood who don't know the facts or at all. And I'll just watch stuff explode and be entertained for 90 minutes. But how does that compare for children who kind of see something on a screen and might be more inclined to believe that it's 100% accurate? Now, DEI completely took over. Is there any other bigger institution in Hollywood, which is in and of itself a giant institution? Is there something bigger than Disney? Disney, we had a few years ago, it was revealed they have a secret agenda.
I identify as like a biromantic asexual.
As a Black person, as a Black queer person, as a Black queer and trans person, to do the work of holding the company accountable means unpacking my own pain for somebody else to learn.
Last summer, we removed all of the gendered greetings in relationship to our live spiels. So we no longer say ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We've provided training for all of our cast members in relationship to that. So now they know it's hello everyone or hello friends.
It's like, I love Disney's content. I grew up watching, all of the classics. They have been a huge, informative part of my life. But at the same time, I worked at small studios most of my career, and I'd heard, you hear whispers. I'd heard things like, oh, they won't let you show this at a Disney show. And I'm like, okay. So I was a little sus when I started. But then my experience was bafflingly the opposite of what I had heard. On my little pocket of, like, Proud Family Disney TVA, the showrunners were super welcoming. Meredith Roberts and like our leadership over there has been so welcoming to like my like not at all secret gay agenda. And
My not at all secret gay agenda for the kids, of course. That institution completely co-opted by a bunch of DEI hires. All right. Then there's sort of a rundown. If we go back to this piece of on the Lost Generation Compact magazine, where it just gives a few other areas that have been infiltrated that are just worth throwing out there, and throw again up the image, The Lost Generation by Jacob Savage. Everywhere else, white men dropped from 31% of law school matriculants in 2016 to 25% in 2024. 2014, white men were 31% of the American medical students. 2025, they're just 20%. And at Google, white men went from half the workforce 10 years ago to less than a third. 34% decline over the last 10 years. So we have the legal profession, the medical profession, and the big tech are all seeing a decline. And is it because white guys just aren't interested in medicine or law or technology or media or academia, Hollywood? No, they're just not being allowed into these institutions. They're being purposefully pushed out, which means that those institutions in and of themselves, there's going to be a suffering if they don't hire the best people. And that's the argument against DEI. That's the very practical argument. If you have a business and you purposefully don't hire the best people because you're more interested in immutable characteristics than who deserves to work there, who are the best workers, then your product is going to suffer. But there's a greater game afoot here. There's a greater manipulation. There's a greater con game here, because I alluded to it. Poking you, right? I'm poking you, getting you angrier and angrier and angrier. That's the con. It's a Kansas City shuffle. They give you a con game with the expectation that you're eventually going to figure that out. And while you're patting yourself on the back and trying to play that game out to your own advantage, the real con game is going on behind the scenes. Now, what am I talking about? The on its face con that you're being told is that we're going to force you to express fealty to us, bend a knee, donate to our causes over and over and over again. If you look like real Steve Friend here, you're pale complexion, you got a twig and berries between your legs, you're married to a woman, you're a cis white male, you are irredeemable. Just give us all your money. You cannot donate to our causes enough. You have to apologize, do the throat clear before you do any sort of statement, a land acknowledgement, say, as a cis white male, I clearly don't understand your plight. And they keep poking you and poking you and poking you. And they milk you for all that you're worth. That's the on its face con, because when you realize that you're being conned, the natural, I think, reaction to that is going to be, well, I'm getting played. Screw this. And you know what? No matter what I do, I'm never, ever going to be accepted in their eyes. I'm never, ever going to be apologizing enough. They're never going to forgive me. I'll never be redeemed. So whatever, just call me a racist, call me a sexist, call me a bigot or a homophobe, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to elect my own champion. In fact, I'm going to elect my own champion, and I'm going to eject from all these institutions. Screw Hollywood. I'm not going to worry about sending my kids to college at all. I don't read the news. It's all fake afterwards. I've ejected. I'm going to be insulated from that. I'm going to eject from the system entirely. And then when I pick my new champion, well, then he'll just snap his fingers and everything will be made whole again. It'll all be good. That's not what the real con is, though, because once you take that final step, you've allowed them to infiltrate all these institutions. They haven't surrendered the power. The communists that use DEI to seize the choke points, they're not going to give them up. They're just going to bide their time, and they're going to wait until the political winds shift, the pendulum swings the other way, and they still own all those institutions. And then they get to do what they really want to do because they've already bilked you for all your money. And now you're on record as saying, I'm not apologizing anymore. So you kind of sound like a racially motivated violent extremist. Maybe all those attorneys that have matriculated to the law schools and been acceptable to our DEI standards, they're going to go into prosecutors' offices and they're going to do what they wanted all along and put you in a cage. So they've gotten you at the beginning. And when you woke up, you didn't really wake up to what was all along. And that was you under their boot to throat at all times. Now, that's kind of a dark perspective to have, but I think that there's ways to rectify the problem. It's worth going into. Now, the Kansas City Shuffle sort of explained it. They got you coming. They got you going. How do you overcome it? Well, you got to find the right doctor. You got to find the right lawyer, ones that share your values. If I go to a doctor right now, I ask them, are you vaccinated? If it's yes, I'm out the door. Did you wear a mask? No, not interested. Were you willing to open up your doors if you're a business owner when local jurisdiction said, stay home, stay safe, shut down your non-essential business that you use to feed your family? Well, I'm going to go shop at your shop more often than the big box store if that's available to me. Academia, we can't totally eject. We can do the homeschool thing. Take back the school boards. Local level, get the right people in positions, take the filth off the shelves, control the curriculum, push the communists out, take back your own choke points in your own communities. Hollywood, go support movies like David. Don't go watch Avatar. And then from a media standpoint, the self-serving, I'm not the best at trying to advertise the AMRAD pot, but I think you need to go out there and support independent media that's actually willing to speak truth to power, not just imbibe what outlets like the New York Times say, that Mexicans coming to America accept everything they want, but vice versa, no, you're bad, you're a colonizer, and you're just ruining Mexico City by bringing back all that government, all that sweet American cash so that they can prosper. No, that's a bad thing. We're going to always endeavor to tell the truth here from our perspective, and that's the prime directive of the American Radicals podcast, where we're common sense extremists. So that'll wrap up today's episode on Wednesday edition, January 7th. I do, however, have a palate cleanse for you. That's parenthetically sort of adjacent to a diversity, equity, and inclusion reference. People look different, people speak different languages. What happens, though, if you have a medical condition and actually wake up and speak like you are a member of a different ethnic group? This is a wild one. From what I can tell, it looks legit. Let's just give it a play.
The English woman who had a stroke and now speaks with a permanent Chinese accent.
It wasn't until I was in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, she actually said, are you aware of the way you're speaking? And I said, oh, I sound like I have a slur. And she said, no, you sound like you could work at a Chinese restaurant. She said, yeah, you could work in the local China house or something.
Sarah was an IT specialist until a severe migraine, bordering on a stroke, brought the syndrome on.
Cash.
Crash.
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 Crashed.
Crashed.
Okay, let's try reading.
You wish to know all about my grandfather.
The English woman who had a stroke.
Wild stuff, guys. I don't know. Hopefully she got treated by a doctor who didn't attend an academic institution where they were taught by a bunch of communists. But who knows? All right, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back with you tomorrow, Thursday edition of the American Radicals podcast. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.